There is a phrase you use dozens of times a day without realizing you're creating reality with it. It's not an affirmation you repeat intentionally. It's not a mantra you learned in some course. It's the simplest phrase there is. 2 words that come before everything you believe about yourself. 2 words that the biblical tradition places in the mouth of God when Moses asks the Creator's name. 2 words that quantum physics is beginning to recognize as the most fundamental collapse of the field of possibilities. I am. And what you place after those 2 words is what determines what the field can express through you. Not what you want, not what you visualize, what you declare yourself to be. I am someone who always struggles. I am the kind of person this doesn't work for. I am not enough for this. I am someone who tries, but never gets there. Those sentences may never have crossed your mind in that direct form, but they operate silently, constantly, like an invisible current that determines the direction of everything floating on the surface of your life. And here is what you were never taught. Every time you used manifestation techniques from inside those unexamined I am declarations, you are trying to create different results from an identity that doesn't include those results as possible. It's like trying to change a shadow without moving the object that casts it. Let me mirror your journey up to here. You found the idea that reality is malleable, that consciousness participates in creating what you experience, that there is a law operating in reality that responds to what you are and what you declare. That resonated, not as a new idea, but as recognition of something you always sensed. There was an intelligence in the universe that seemed to respond to your intentions, at least at certain moments. And then you tried to use it, with techniques, with protocols, with systems that promised to teach you how to make the law work in your favor. And it worked, sometimes, for periods, in certain areas. But consistency didn't arrive. Life kept responding in ways that didn't match what you were trying to create. And the question that won't go away is, why? If the law is a law, if it operates with the same precision for everyone, why do some people live in it consistently while most experience only flashes? The answer is in the 2 words you use without examining them. I am. What comes after them isn't a belief you can change with affirmations. It's an identity built through accumulated experience, repeated patterns, and declarations made over years without awareness of the power they carried. And that identity is the filter every law, every technique, every intention must pass through before it becomes real experience. Less than 1% of people who study manifestation reach this level of understanding. Not because it's complex, but because it's too simple to seem important enough. You're here because you're ready for the simplicity that changes everything. And there's a question that will stay alive in you as we move forward. One that only closes at the end. If I am creates reality, and if your current I am was built by decades of unintentional declarations, how do you change it without simply adding another layer of declarations that never reaches the level where it operates? Before we understand what is changing, we need to look at what has always been stopping you. The most universal behavior among people who study manifestation is this. They try to add new declarations without removing the old ones. It's like planting new flowers in a garden without pulling out the weeds. For a while, the flowers grow, but the weeds have deeper roots, they've been established longer, and they inevitably take over again. You declare, I am abundant with all the consciousness you can access. But somewhere deeper, in a place words don't easily reach, there is another older, more repeated, more nervous system-anchored declaration. I am someone for whom money has always been hard. And that older declaration has gained credibility through real experiences, repeated patterns, accumulated evidence your emotional system registered as proof. The new declaration, 2 months old, is competing with one that's decades old. It's not a fair fight. New imposed declaration versus old rooted identity. Those are the 2 poles. And most manifestation practices operate exclusively on the first pole, while the second remains untouched. Here is the inversion that transforms everything. The problem isn't that you're not declaring the right things. It's that you haven't examined what you're declaring without realizing it. Neuroplasticity, the nervous system's ability to create new neural pathways, is not activated by repeating words. It's activated by emotional experiences, real enough to leave a deep imprint on the nervous system. Words that don't produce real emotional experience pass through the system without creating a new neural route. They stay on the surface, and the surface is not where identity lives. Identity lives in the body. It lives in automatic responses. It lives in what the nervous system does before you have time to think. And it's at that level, not the level of conscious words, that I am operates with real power. Think of two seeds planted in the same soil. One is new, placed with care and intention, watered and attended to every day. The other has been there for 10 years, with roots that reach deep into the ground, needing no special care to stay alive. Which one will prevail when the season changes? You didn't fail because you didn't believe enough. You were taught to plant new seeds without learning how to work with old roots. And the old roots, the I am declarations built by years of real experience, have a depth the new seed can't compete with through willpower. This isn't condemnation of what you tried. It's liberation. Because once you know where the real work needs to happen, the direction changes completely. It stops being about adding more. It becomes about going deeper. But here's what most people stop hearing. And it's exactly what changes everything. Neville Goddard, the Barbadian mystic who taught in New York in the 1940s and 1950s and profoundly influenced everything that later came to be taught about the law of attraction, had a way of describing I am that goes beyond any modern manifestation framework. For Goddard, I am was not an affirmation. It was the name of God within you. It was creative consciousness itself, not a tool you use, but what you fundamentally are. And what you place after I am is not what you desire. It is what you inhabit. The state you assume as present reality, not as a future possibility. The distinction is total. Saying, I am abundant, as a desire disguised as the present, creates one thing. Inhabiting, I am abundant, as an assumed state, as if it is already the reality you operate from, creates something completely different. Quantum physics has a concept that illuminates this in a disturbing way: superposition. Before it is observed, a particle exists in all possible states simultaneously. The act of observation, directed consciousness, collapses that superposition into a specific state. The state it collapses into is not determined by the observer's desire. It is determined by the nature of the observer, by the structure of the consciousness doing the observing. If the consciousness observing is in a state of scarcity, if the underlying I am carries the identity of someone who doesn't have it yet, someone still getting there, then the field collapses into what matches that I am, always, with the precision of a physical law. Think of an invisible magnetic field permeating everything around you. It doesn't choose what to attract. It attracts what is of its nature. Iron draws iron. A specific frequency resonates with what vibrates at the same frequency. You don't see the field, but you see its effects in how iron moves, how particles organize around a magnet. In the same way, the I am you carry isn't directly visible, but its effects are visible in everything that organizes around you as a recurring pattern. So the mechanism is not attraction, it is resonance. You don't attract what you want. You resonate with what corresponds to what you've declared yourself to be. And resonance is deeper than conscious intention. It operates at the level where I am lives, not at the level where affirmations are formulated. Take a deep breath now. Feel where in your body there is some I am declaration you did not consciously choose. Not to correct it now, only to recognize it as real, as something that has weight, as something the field responds to. Where do you feel it? The practical consequence is still pending. If the field responds to the underlying I am, and if that I am was built by years of accumulated experience, then the question of how to change it so that it produces a different resonance is more urgent than any visualization technique. But when you truly understand this, you realize there is an obstacle almost no one mentions. Something directly in the way between understanding the mechanism and being able to apply it in a way that creates real change. What blocks you is not what you think it is. The fatal mistake is trying to change I am from the outside in. Most identity-based manifestation approaches offer a version of the same advice. Choose a new I am statement, repeat it with feeling, act as if it's true, and gradually it will become the I am the field responds to. That advice isn't completely wrong, but it's incomplete in a way that makes it frustrating in practice for most people. Here's the issue. To assume a new I am is present reality, you have to be able to inhabit it emotionally in a genuine way. Not as performance, not as trying to feel what it would be like, but as real experience, registered by the nervous system as true. And to inhabit it emotionally in a genuine way, you need a relationship with the divine I am, with the creative consciousness within you before any specific declaration, that most people were never taught how to access directly. Here is the paradox that will feel impossible until you cross it. To change what comes after I am, you first need contact with the I am before any complement. With the pure awareness of existing, the state Neville called the state of being, prior to qualification, prior to narrative, prior to any declaration of who you are or are not. That state is what mystical traditions call the fertile void, pure consciousness, what you are before you are anything specific. And here is the obstacle. Your current identity, the collection of I am declarations built over years, doesn't know how to reach that state without bringing itself along. The mind trying to access pure I am automatically carries its qualifications. It tries to think about the pure state instead of inhabiting it. Consciousness thinking about pure I am versus consciousness inhabiting pure I am. Those are the two poles, and the distance between them isn't knowledge. It's the quality of presence. The guardian between you and real change in I am is not lack of belief. It's not spiritual resistance. It's the mind's habit of interpreting instead of inhabiting, analyzing instead of being, thinking about the experience instead of being inside the experience. And if you've made it this far, if you're feeling the distinction between thinking about I am and inhabiting I am as something real, even if you don't yet know exactly how to reach the second, you're already in a different place than most. Most people confuse the two and keep trying to think their way into a state that cannot be reached through thought. You didn't confuse it. So how do you inhabit I am before the qualifications? How do you enter the state of pure awareness of existing, from which any new I am statement can be assumed with real power? Here is what changes everything. The doorway into pure I am is not 2 hours of meditation, not an elaborate ritual, not a technique that requires preparation. It is a pause, a specific, deliberate pause you can do right now, in any moment, anywhere, where you direct awareness to the one thing always present and carrying no I am declaration. The fact that you exist, not who you are, not what you have or don't have, not what you want to be. The simple, irreducible, absolutely certain fact that you are here, that awareness is happening, that there is an I that perceives. That fact, pure awareness of existing before any qualification, is I am before any complement. It's the state Neville described as God's presence in you. It's what traditions call Atman, Rigpa, witness consciousness, what you are before you are anything specific. And this state has a quality you will recognize immediately when you access it. It is effortless. It is without tension. It's like discovering you've been holding your breath without realizing and letting go. The practice is this, and it begins now. For an instant, just an instant, with no agenda for what comes next, direct your attention to the fact that you are perceiving, not to the content of what you perceive, but to the act of perceiving itself, to the awareness that is present as you read these words. It is there before any thought about it. It doesn't need to be created, only noticed. Do that now. Before continuing, pause for a few seconds. Don't think about awareness. Simply notice it is present, that there is something here that perceives. Feel the quality of that state, the quiet that exists before any declaration of who you are. That place, that state, that quality. This is where every I am statement gains real power to be assumed as truth. What you just touched, even briefly, even subtly, is pure I am. It's the soil in which any new declaration can be planted, so it reaches the level where identity operates. Now, from inside that state, not before entering it, but from within it, bring in an I am declaration you want to be real, not as a desire, but as an assumed present, as something you declare from a state of being that does not need external approval to be real. I am someone who lives in abundance. I am someone who receives genuine love. I am someone whose life responds to what I choose to be. The difference between saying these words from your habitual state and saying them from pure I am is the difference between whispering in a noisy room and speaking in complete silence. Same words, completely different impact. This answers how to assume a new I am with real power. But there is a deeper layer that determines whether the declaration assumed from this state will consolidate into the identity the field responds to, or be absorbed back into the old pattern in a few days. Comment the words I am now, not as a technique, as a declaration of the state you are inhabiting in this moment, as a seed planted in the collective field of everyone in this frequency right now. And that deeper layer, that is where everything you've learned becomes permanent, or disappears in a few days. The two words I am appear at the heart of traditions that never spoke to each other, and each arrived at the same conclusion about what these words carry. The book of Exodus, specifically chapter 3, verse 14, records the scene in which Moses asks the fire that burns without consuming the bush, "What is your name?" The answer is not a name in the ordinary sense. It is a statement of pure existence, Ayaya, Asher Ayaya, often translated as I am who I am, but in ancient Hebrew carrying the nuance of I will be what I will be, a consciousness identical to its own existence, whose name is the act of existing. And Moses is told to say to the children of Israel that I am has sent me to you. The Creator presents not attributes, not powers, not descriptions, only the irreducible fact of existing. The Advaita Vedanta tradition, the most rigorous non-dual school of Hinduism, whose most well-known modern exponent was Ramana Maharshi, has as its central practice the inquiry, who am I, not to find a conceptual answer, but to trace the path back to pure I am before any qualification. Ramana taught that the only real answer to who am I is the act of inquiry itself, the awareness that asks, existing before any answer. And inhabiting that state, I am as pure awareness of existing, is the deepest realization. Max Planck's quantum physics, the father of quantum theory, expressed in his lectures something that rarely appears in standard physics textbooks, that consciousness is fundamental, that matter cannot exist independent of a consciousness that observes it. Planck wasn't making a spiritual claim. He was describing what physics forced him to conclude. At the most fundamental level of reality, observer and observed are inseparable. The I am that observes and the field that is observed are, at that level, one. Neville Goddard's writings, which synthesized biblical tradition with principles of creative consciousness in a series of books and lectures between 1939 and 1972, repeat a statement in many forms. Imagination is the only creator. And by imagination, Goddard did not mean visualization. He meant the assumed state of being, emotionally inhabiting a reality as present from pure I am, so that the field had no choice but to correspond. Exodus's biblical tradition, Ramana Maharshi's Advaita Vedanta, Max Planck and quantum physics, Neville Goddard's teachings, different cultures, centuries, vocabularies, one identical structure. I am is the name of creative consciousness. It is what you are before any specific declaration. And it is from that state, not from thoughts about it, but from inhabiting it, that any new reality can be assumed with power the field recognizes and responds to. The unifying statement is this: you don't need to earn the new reality before you assume it. You need to assume the new identity before reality confirms it, because reality always confirms afterward, never before. The field does not send proof before faith. It responds to faith with proof. Now bring this back to you. Think of the moments when something you wanted simply happened. not because you worked to deserve it, but because something in the state you were in made it inevitable. When the I am you were inhabiting at that moment naturally matched what manifested, those moments weren't accidents. They were the field operating through the I am that was active. The question isn't how to make those moments happen more. The question is how to make the I am that created them your central operating state, not the exception. Assumed state with real power versus desired state with empty urgency. Those are the two poles. And the difference between them isn't technique or discipline. It's where you are when you declare. Imagine the sun rising. It doesn't try to illuminate. It doesn't strain to radiate. It simply is what it is. And light is the inevitable consequence of what it is, not the result of effort toward light. Pure I am has the same nature. When inhabited, correspondence with the field is not the result of work. It's the inevitable consequence of what it is. And when you incorporate this, not as an idea, but as an identity you inhabit from pure I am, something changes that cannot be undone. You are not someone trying to become the creator of your reality. You already are. You always have been. The only difference between now and before this video is that now you have vocabulary for what has always been happening. And that vocabulary changes the quality of how you will inhabit I am from today forward. Pure I am, the awareness of existing before any qualification, is not something you need to create or develop or earn through enough practice. It is present in you now, just as it always has been, just as it always will be. It is what you are before you are anything specific. It is the name of God in you. And from that state, which you just touched in this video, even briefly, any I am statement can be assumed with power the field recognizes. Not as a new affirmation about who you want to be, but as an assumed state from who you already are at the deepest level. We are those who choose to inhabit pure I am before declaring, who choose to assume the state before waiting for proof, who recognize that the creator they searched for outside themselves was in the only place it could ever be, in the I am that comes before everything you believe about yourself. Don't subscribe to the channel. Subscribe to this I am frequency. If what was said here resonated not as learning but as remembering, if you recognize pure I am as something you knew before you had words for it, you know what to do. The subscribe button is here. What it represents is choosing to keep receiving what points you back to the creator you already are. If this is resonating in your bones, you know what to do. You are not someone learning how to create reality. You are creative consciousness recognizing itself. And that difference, which seems merely semantic, is the difference between operating as a passive receiver of what happens and operating as the I am that assumes the state before waiting for proof. The final paradox that compresses everything into a single, beautiful tension. You never needed to become the creator. You needed to stop acting as if you were something else. Everything you want to create begins with two words, not with the right visualization, not with the right technique, with the state of being that comes before words and gives them the power to be more than sounds. Comment I am below. Just that, as a declaration of the state you're inhabiting now, as a seed in the field of everyone in this frequency, in this moment. Today you understood that the two most powerful words in the universe are not an affirmation. They are a declaration of existence. And what comes after them is not a desire to manifest, but a state to assume as present from pure I am. But there's a layer we haven't touched yet, one that determines what happens when external reality still hasn't matched the I am you assumed. How you stay in the assumed state when the evidence around you still says something else. What Neville called persistence in assumption, and why without it, any new I am collapses in a few days. In the next video, I'll show why everything you believe about spiritual faith is making you abandon the I am you assumed exactly before the field has time to respond, and what to do in the silent days that precede every manifestation. The creator you are is already in motion. I need to be specific about something that is rarely said clearly. Most manifestation teachings that entered the mainstream over the last decades, from The Secret to its successors, from Abraham Hicks to its derivatives, captured part of Neville Goddard's teaching and lost the other part, the part they captured. The inner state determines the outer reality. Feeling is the prayer. Consciousness creates. The part they lost, I am, is the name of God in you. Not a tool you use, but what you fundamentally are. And that distinction between using I am as a tool and recognizing I am as your nature changes everything about how the process works. When you use I am as a tool, you operate from separation. There is an I using the tool, and there is a field the tool supposedly influences. There is distance, and in distance, there is the frequency of someone who hasn't gotten there yet. Someone trying, someone who still needs to reach it. When you recognize I am as your nature, the position is different. There is no separation between you and the field that creates reality. You are not outside trying to influence the field from within. You are the consciousness through which the field expresses. And the reality you experience is not independent from the I am you inhabit. It is the inevitable expression of it. That is not abstract philosophy. It's the difference between two completely different experiences of how life responds to you. In the first position, using I am as a tool, reality responds slowly, inconsistently, with the feeling that you're pushing something heavy that sometimes moves and sometimes doesn't. In the second, inhabiting I am as nature, reality responds with the naturalness of a river following gravity. Effortless. Because what you are and what reality expresses are the same process seen from different angles. You've come here because you're ready to move from the first position to the second, not as a concept to understand, but as a state to inhabit. The second level of the problem is more specific and harder to see than the first. Even among people who understand that the underlying I am is what determines what the field expresses, there's a trap that keeps most in the same loop, trying to examine and change. I am statements one by one, like items on a checklist to fix. I am abundant replaces I am poor. I am loved replaces I am alone. I am healthy replaces I am sick. That has value, but it's incomplete for a fundamental reason. I am statements aren't the cause, they're symptoms. The cause is your relationship with I am before any qualification. Pure creative consciousness in you before you are anything specific. If that relationship hasn't been examined, if you're still operating from a position where I am is a tool and not your nature, then changing individual statements is like changing fruit on a tree without touching the root. New fruit appears for a while, but the sap still carries whatever the root determines. The root is your relationship with I am itself. And the most common relationship people have with I am is unfamiliarity, not hostility. Unfamiliarity, pure I am, creative consciousness before any qualification, was rarely presented as what you already are. In many religious and spiritual traditions, it was presented as external, God out there, in the sky, whom you pray to, a higher consciousness you aspire to, but are not now. That unfamiliarity is the deeper problem. And in manifestation practice, it shows up as the feeling that you're asking the universe for permission to have what you want, rather than recognizing that what you are already includes what you're seeking. Petition to the universe versus declaration of creative consciousness, those are the two poles. And most manifestation practices, however spiritual they seem, operate in the petition pole. But here's what most people stop hearing, and it's exactly what changes everything. The mechanism has a third dimension that goes beyond what we've described and may be Neville Goddard's central teaching that least appears in modern summaries of his work. Goddard taught that imagination, understood as the power to assume a state of being, is not one mental faculty among others. It is creative consciousness itself. For him, the biblical God was not an external being who created the world and keeps intervening. It was the imaginative consciousness operating in you, the power to assume a state of being with enough emotional conviction that the field corresponds. And creation, for Goddard, did not happen because consciousness sent an order to the universe. It happened because consciousness and the field that expresses reality are the same process. When you genuinely assume a state of being, when you inhabit the corresponding I am with real emotional conviction, reality begins to organize to match it. Not because something external answers your request, but because consciousness and reality are different expressions of the same thing. This flips your relationship to manifestation. Most people wait for reality to change and then feel the corresponding "I am" is valid. They wait for proof before assuming the state. They wait for the job before feeling professionally fulfilled, the relationship before feeling loved, health before feeling whole. Goddard inverts the order. Assume the state before proof. Inhabit the corresponding "I am" as present, not future. And let reality organize from the assumed state, not the other way around. That inversion is the structure behind every healing and miracle in the New Testament, as Goddard interpreted it. When Jesus healed the blind, he didn't pray asking God to send healing. He declared the healed state as present. Your eyes are opened. The healing didn't precede the declaration. The declaration preceded the healing. The state was assumed first. And quantum coherence, the alignment between inner state and outer field, is the mechanism by which the assumed state collapses the field into the correspondence that confirms what was declared. Take a deep breath now. Notice where you are waiting for proof before assuming the state. Not to judge, just to see. Is there somewhere in your life you keep saying, "I will feel this when..." Bring it into awareness. Then, just for an instant, reverse the order. Feel what it would be like to assume the state before proof, not as affirmation, but as inhabiting. Where do you feel it in the body? So the complete mechanism is pure "I am" as the starting point, a new "I am" as an assumed state from that point, and reality as the inevitable reflection of that state, assumed with enough emotional conviction. Simple, not easy, because the habitual order is so ingrained that reversing it can feel irresponsible. But simple. The obstacle has a dimension that is both deeply personal and universal. The difficulty of inhabiting a new "I am" before external proof is not primarily technical, it's relational. It's your relationship with uncertainty, with the period between assuming the state and seeing the correspondence appear. Neville called that period the bridge of incidents, the process by which outer circumstances reorganize between the moment the state is assumed and the moment the correspondence becomes visible. And he was explicit. That period is not optional. There is no way to assume a new "I am" and see it instantly reflected in material reality. There is always a crossing, and the crossing has a quality many people weren't prepared for: silence. Sometimes right after you assume a new state genuinely, the external world appears not to respond. In some cases, before it matches, it even intensifies the old patterns, as if the field is testing the new "I am" before reorganizing. That silence, that crossing, is the most common guardian that destroys assumed "I am" states before they have time to express. Most people interpret silence as evidence the assumption wasn't genuine, or the process isn't working, or they're not the kind of person it works for. And they abandon the assumed state exactly before the field has time to respond. Persistence in the assumed state versus abandonment in the face of silence. Those are the two poles. And persistence, as Neville meant it, is not willpower ignoring reality. It's the quality of consciousness that doesn't need external confirmation to know the assumed state is real. It is faith in the most precise sense, not belief despite evidence. But knowing that does not depend on external evidence to remain. And here's the paradox. To have that quality of consciousness, you need a relationship with pure "I am" that transcends any specific declaration. A relationship where you know, through direct experience, that the "I am" you are is more real than any circumstance that has not yet responded. And that is exactly what the practice of returning to pure "I am" begins to build. The practice has a second dimension Neville called living from within, and it may be the most practical and radical instruction in his work. Living from within means your actions, conversations, and choices during the day begin to be made from the assumed "I am", not from the old "I am" still waiting for external confirmation. Not as performance for others, as inner reality expressing itself as natural behavior. Here's a concrete way to do it. Identify one small decision, not dramatic, not life-altering, that you would make differently if the I am you want to inhabit were already your central state. Not a whole life overhaul, one decision, one conversation you'd have differently, one way you would respond in a specific situation. Then make that decision from the assumed state, not because external circumstances justify it, but because that's how someone who lives from that I am naturally acts. That small act creates what no affirmation can. Inner evidence that the assumed I am is real enough to guide real behavior. And when the nervous system registers that inner evidence, resistance begins to soften, not through intellectual conviction, but through accumulated experience that the new state is operationally real. The second extension is just as simple. During the day, when you notice you've slipped back into the old I am, when the implicit phrase, I am someone this doesn't work for, or any version of it, activates, pause. 1 instant. No drama, no judgment, no long meditation. Just long enough to return to pure I am, to notice there is awareness before any qualification. And then, from that point, reassume the I am you chose, not as error correction, but as a practice of return. The same thing every contemplative tradition describes. You will forget. You will be pulled back into the old state, and the practice is return, gentle, repeated, without judgment. Each return is an I am declaration, made from the place where it has power. Comment I am now, as a declaration that you recognize where the real power of the two words lives, not on the surface of affirmations, but in the state of being that comes before them. The convergence of traditions goes even deeper when you look at what each says about the relationship between I am and time, and what emerges flips the usual relationship to manifestation and explains why Goddard insisted time is not an obstacle for creative consciousness. Jewish mystical tradition, especially the Zohar, the central text of Kabbalah written in the 13th century, describes creation not as an event in the past, but as a continuous process happening in every instant. Creation was not completed, it's happening now. And human consciousness, made in the image and likeness of God, participates in that continuous creation through every I am it declares and inhabits. Time, in that view, is not a line from past to future. It is a field of possibilities. Consciousness collapses into sequential moments of experience. And what consciousness collapses in each moment is determined by the I am it inhabits in that moment. Erwin Schrödinger's physics, one of the founders of quantum mechanics, wrote something rarely mentioned outside the more philosophical texts. Consciousness cannot be explained as a product of physical processes. It is, rather, the precondition for any experience of physical reality. Schrödinger even wrote that consciousness can never be expressed in the plural, that there is a single consciousness manifesting as apparent multiplicities. The individual I am, in that view, is a localized expression of a consciousness that is, in its deepest nature, one and universal. Sufism, especially Ibn Arabi, the greatest mystical philosopher of the Arabic world, 12th, 13th century, describes creation as the breath of the divine. The world manifests with the divine exhale, universal consciousness expressing itself as particular forms. And return to the divine, the inhale, is the process by which particular forms recognize they are expressions of universal consciousness. The individual I am is not separate from the divine I am. It is the divine I am experiencing itself through a particular form. Antonio Damasio's neuroscience, especially his work on the construction of the self, arrives at a conclusion that resonates strongly with what mystical traditions have always claimed. What we call me is not a fixed entity existing independently of experience. It is an ongoing construction process, a narrative the nervous system creates and recreates moment by moment. And what guides that ongoing construction is, ultimately, the I am declaration the nervous system uses as its reference point. Zohar and Kabbalah, Schrödinger and consciousness as precondition, Ibn Arabi and the divine breath, Damasio and the self as process. 4 sources. 1 structure, I am, is not a trait you have. It's a process you are, continuous and creative, capable of being assumed differently in any moment when the consciousness you fundamentally are recognizes the power of the two words that name it. And here is what that means for you now. Pure I Am, which you touched in this text, is not a state you reach after enough practice. It is what you are before any practice. It is the starting point, not the destination. And every I Am you declare from that point is not an attempt to change who you are. It is creative consciousness expressing what it already contains implicitly. Past built by the old I Am versus present created by the assumed I Am, those are the two poles. And you can choose the second in any instant. Not because the past didn't happen, but because the I Am that creates is not limited by what it created before. Imagine the sun rising each morning. It doesn't carry the weight of the nights before it. Each dawn is the sun fully being what it is. No reference to prior darkness, no memory of the cold it crossed, simply being. Pure I Am has that nature. It doesn't carry the residue of earlier declarations. Each moment, it is genuinely inhabited, it is complete. And the field around you begins to match what it is, not what it was. Something will permanently change in how you relate to those two words after this text. Before I Am was likely how you began sentences about yourself. Descriptive, based on accumulated evidence, usually formed from what life has confirmed so far. After, I Am becomes creative declaration. Creative consciousness expressing through you, choosing the state you will assume as present from the only starting point that carries real power. Pure I Am before any qualification. This is not a technique. It is positional. It's a change in where you operate from, not the receiver who waits for confirmation, but the consciousness that declares and is then confirmed. And once this positional shift is experienced with enough clarity, it becomes permanent. Because you can't fully go back to treating I Am as merely descriptive after you've experienced it as creative. Something in the nervous system recognizes the difference and can't unsee what it saw. You finishing this text are not the same as you were at the beginning. Not dramatically, not visibly, not necessarily in a way others will notice immediately, but in the quality of your relationship to the two words you will say dozens of times in the next hours. And in that quality, everything begins to change. We are those who choose to inhabit I Am before proof, who choose to declare from being rather than ask from wanting, who recognize that creative consciousness is not something they are trying to access. It is what they are when they stop acting like they are something else. What you do in the next moments after you finish this matters more than anything said here. Not because you must apply something immediately, but because there is a window, short but real, when pure I Am is more accessible than it usually is. When the nervous system is still permeable to what was touched here. When the distance between your habitual state and pure I Am is smaller than normal. Use this window not to do something spiritual, but to notice. In the next minutes, pay attention to the sentences that silently form in your mind that begin with I Am. Not to correct them, just to hear them. To recognize what is being declared. To have, perhaps for the first time with this clarity, awareness of the constant creator operating in you without supervision. That level of awareness, that simple act of hearing the I Am operating in you, is already a change. Because the creator operating unconsciously creates automatically from the habitual state. The creator that begins to observe itself gains the option to choose the state it creates from. And the option to choose is everything. You have always been in the field of I Am. The only question left permanently open is, what I Am will you declare from now on?